So, hi, good afternoon. This is Naeem on NATV, and I'm really pleased today to have a fantastic guest, someone I got to know the last sort of 6 months. She was the former customer experience manager at Sainsbury's, and considering all the stuff that's going on at the moment in terms of getting back to work, particularly in the retail and hospitality space, I thought it'd be great to have Clare come and talk through some of her best thinking and ideas to you guys. So let's just bring Clare onto the video. Clare, can you see me?
Hi everyone.
Hey.
I can.
Brilliant. So I was just saying, it'd be really good to get you to share some of your insights, particularly to my retail and hospitality forum. Do you want to just introduce yourself? Because I've probably done you an injustice and said you were the former CX manager at Sainsbury's, but
yeah, customer experience manager. Yeah, sure. I've got it in my presentation, so I can, if you want me to get going, I can introduce myself as part of that.
Yeah, so let me share the screen.
Okie dokie.
There you go, and over to you.
Okay, I'm just going to make. Okay, super. Okay, so yeah, so our conversation was based on the fact that I did a little webinar on behalf of Debbie Aquara last week, looking at the trends in the UK and how to manage CX Post COVID-19. So part of this presentation is based on that, but also some new thinking that went on LinkedIn this morning. So you're getting it fresh from the source. And if you can go to the next slide, because you're in control, Naeem. Yeah, so a little bit about me. So these days, I'm the founder and director of my own customer experience design agency called CX Experience, and I've been doing that for 2.5 years. But before the lockdown, I was regularly flying around the world as a keynote speaker. But I spent formative years actually in hospitality on the front line, working my way up from waitress to later general manager, and spent my first couple of years in CX with Whitbread. And I spent then 12 years in a variety of CX leadership roles until I was head of CX most recently at Sainsbury's, and I left at the end of 2017. And the most recent thing I'm working on now also is a series of books about how to be awesome at CX. So we're fully branded with all the green today. Okay, next slide, please. So during the next 15 minutes or so, I really want to help you to understand the importance of emotion in the context of what's happening with COVID-19. Spend some time looking at how we can reopen safely. Think about the future of CX in terms of strategies and how we can respond to change. And I'll leave you with my top 10 takeaways. Next slide. Yeah, so I guess first of all, I just wanted to say that the basics of customer experience have not changed. The way customers evaluate their experience and their perception of it is 50% how did you make them feel, 25% how easy was it, and whether or not they were able to achieve their goal. So that hasn't changed. But the big difference is how strong people feel and what they care about has changed. So next slide, please. So what I put on LinkedIn this morning was a picture of what I call the Corona coaster. So this, I think, is just testament to the fact that we are all absolutely in this together and experiencing the same things. So if you look at it here, mood goes up the tall side and the time that we spend in lockdown goes along the bottom. And I don't know about you, but this happened to me. Initially, I literally fell off a cliff of panic and denial and not believing that what was happening in our country was occurring. And when lockdown actually set in and kind of day by day, those measures increased, I really started to panic, and I was genuinely scared what that meant in terms of my family. My mum's vulnerable in terms of health conditions, etc. And then what kind of continued to happen, especially in those early days or early weeks, were these like loops of emotions that could happen, in fact, within the same day. So flitting between fear, a bit smaller, and then seeing the compassion that was around in my local community, for example, and feeling really like, this is awesome. But then the next day I'd be back down to the bottom again, experiencing loneliness. And as a single person living on my own, I've never been like trapped for 23 hours a day. That was particularly difficult for me. But then raising again when I saw, what the way businesses were responding to helping, for example, the NHS and other people. And those cycle days, so if you think about a Thursday, for example, we've got the Prime Minister's announcement of however many deaths that we've had in that day, and then the same night we're all on our doorsteps clapping for our carers. So in terms of that emotional instability compared to what we had as our own normal has drastically changed. And where I think we're starting to get to now as things begin to reopen is we've kind of got a bit used to it now. We're not so frightened of what's coming, and we can see that the future ahead is looking brighter, and it's going to be more like bunny hops now as things like retail and entertainment reopen. But I think the really important thing from a CX perspective is to think about how can you maximize those positive emotions. So what you do, for example, with your customer service or how you'll respond as a brand can really be part of those uppers. And how can you help customers to reduce the impact of those negative emotions through the proposition, your offer, and how you help them minimize those negatives. And just remember, this Corona emotion coaster applies to absolutely everybody. So you, me, your friends, your family, your customers, employees, your colleagues, we're all absolutely in this together. So the next slide. So it's all really about having the right mindset, I think, to customer experience right now. So I think a lot of the time we get a bit obsessed with things like voice of the customer, net promoter score, measures, metrics. All that stuff doesn't really matter that much right now. It's about being proactive in how you approach customer service experience, prioritizing health and well-being above all else of your employees and of your customers and of yourself, ensuring that whatever you do is focused on adding value, be kind and sympathetic, make allowances for customers and employees and yourself, ensure you're providing support, and actually you could be able to surprise and delight despite the current circumstances. Next one. My point of view is that the retail landscape will not return to normal, so it's not going to go back to how it was for a number of reasons, and part of that is due to how long the disruption is going to last. So if we're not going to be able to return to normality in social distancing, and then we can gather together, that we're looking at around 2 years until a vaccine is received. And the psychologists are saying that that's going to mean a long-term change in behaviour. So not just in terms of shopping habits, but also the priorities that we have as humans. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later on. So really there are some short-term actions. How do we reopen our stores safely for customers and employees in the coming months, and how do we adapt to customer needs over that period of 2 years, which will become not a trend but a long-term habit. Okay, so next slide please. So this is really difficult because I can't see the slides. Okay, so where we are right now, if you look at the news, is that we've got the highest Corona death toll in Europe. I think it was 34,000 people as of the count yesterday, and that's a very, very real threat. We're also hearing that we have to reopen our economy because it's shrinking at the fastest pace since the economic crisis. But in order to do that, we have to do it safely. Otherwise, we're going to find ourselves in exactly the same boat that we're in now, with having to lock down again. We're hearing about the potential impacts of job losses. Some businesses have already gone under, and we need to be able to reopen to avoid that. But also, we've not got that much clarity on what reopening looks like. However, in the UK, we have had some great examples being led by the grocery sector in terms of how to reopen safely. And there's some really great best practice there that we can follow on from. And actually also, I've seen some great innovation. For example, this headline here about Marks and Spencer partnering with Deliveroo to be able to deliver groceries to order. Innovation and how we change to no contact at all solutions. We've already seen a big change happen in retail with despite what's happening already. And also there's a real shift in this goodwill of customers. So how can we ensure that we capitalise on that in a positive way? Next slide, please. So you've probably all been to the supermarket recently. Of course, I'm going to use an example from Sainsbury's, given my background, my experience there, but they're doing an absolutely fantastic job for customers. We're waiting for government guidance for what other kinds of retail stores look like, but we know it's going to be all about these social distancing measures. So the main thing is going to be about how do we review our own customer journeys where we are. So the first thing is all about communication, and I've seen retailers rather than stores who are setting expectations before customers get there have had a lot better reception of having to behave differently whilst they're there. Thinking about store entry, depending on the size of your location. We've got grocery supermarkets that have massive big boxes and things like B&Q, and people are queuing for miles outside the doors. But if you only got a small store, how are you going to manage people coming in and out? Queues anywhere that they form in supermarkets. You can see here from this picture, there are now screening guards up at the self-checkouts between the queue and the self-checkouts themselves. Each of the checkouts are about a metre apart. So what supermarkets have done is leave one on, one off. So that keeps that 2 metres distance. And that's to ensure we protect both colleagues and employees. Thinking about things like payments, I'm sure all the retailers that are here listening today will be thinking this is great that we're going to be able to go cashless because it's a lot cheaper to be able to deal with that. I think a lot of the resistance was due to customers not wanting to change, but during the course of COVID-19, it's going to become the way that we do things. Obviously disinfecting surfaces, thinking about the supermarkets, you've got people standing at the stations having trolleys and kits them down, providing things like hand sanitizer. I really don't know how that's going to work with things like clothing, but that's a challenge yet to come. With things like fashion stores, employee safety, which I've mentioned, thinking about your service points, will some of them have to close or be screened? And the way that stores are using hosts and marshals to, I suppose, guide customers' behaviour and ensure that they are keeping socially distant, that could be either a really positive thing or a really negative thing, depending on how they do it. So really thinking about how are your employees going to be able to have the right level of service to make that as positive as possible. And in fact, when I've been out doing my supermarket shops, and actually at B&Q the other day, I was absolutely amazed by the energy that some of the employees had to make customers' day and how friendly they were, and actually having not seen anybody for days were a really positive impact on my own personal Corona coaster. So ultimately, there's going to be a couple of questions about which touch points and stores may have to stay closed longer. So for example, in supermarkets, they've not reopened the cafes, they've left the counters closed. And ultimately, I suppose, how can you go either no contact or as low contact as possible, even within a physical environment? Next slide, please. So just quickly touching on category and channel switching. This is the latest data from the British Retail Consortium. You've probably seen it on KPMG, but 19.1% decline in total sales. Food sales, naturally, because it's probably the only thing we could do, are up 16%. Non-food sales down massively at 36%, and non-food up by 57.9%. But is that a behaviour change that's here to stay? And as I said earlier, I think it will be. Can we move on again, please? So yeah, apologies, I pulled these slides together quite last minute, and I've used myself as an example. So these are just from my Instagram. And this is just a reference point for these changing needs and priorities. So I never had an interest in DIY at all, but during lockdown I've discovered that I wanted to invest time and effort and energy in the place that I was spending all of my time, and discovered painting. I didn't ever have time for things like health and well-being, and since coronavirus and not having that much work to do compared to what I usually did, I started to find out and learn about things like mindfulness and meditation and yoga and reading and taking class and signing up for various subscriptions. Fitness has always been a big thing for me, and now I've had to bring that into the home. And if you look at things like category switching or category data, you can't get dumbbells on things like Amazon for love nor money. Everything's sold out really fast. And also our practices of where we work, if we can work from home, have changed as well. So that kind of home office experience has also, I think, changed the way that we need to look ahead. So the considerations we will be making are around categories, channels, customer service, both on and offline, developing new propositions and solutions and new services to respond to who customers are going to be, not as they were, but who we are next. And if anything, it's probably just hastening all of our transformation plans for things like central support locations being able to work from home and digital transformation in our channels for purchase. Next slide again, please. So how are we going to be able to adapt to change? Well, it's going to have to be thinking about space and formats. If the shift to online continues to stay at the rate that it has, we might not need as much physical space in the future. If customers' shopping habits and category change, it's going to mean we need to review our ranges, looking at things like going contactless and offering collections and delivery options as opposed to reliance on physical formats. Diversification into services. I don't know if you've seen John Lewis, I think, announced a couple of weeks ago that their new strategy is to get as least reliance on clothing as possible. So increasing their diversification into financial services. I mentioned payments in store, but also looking at things like Klarna, for example, being able to provide buy now, pay later solutions, reviewing the digital offer, and really thinking about innovation for the future. Next slide, please. And the last slide is just to say, how are we going to get there? How are we going to know what to change and how? And this is my most famous quote, which featured in Forbes a while back. But if you've heard of me, it probably would have been because I said this on a panel once, that building an awesome customer experience doesn't happen by accident. It happens by design. So the capabilities and skills we're going to need in CX, in retail and any sector, is being able to move from kind of understanding the current experience and how behaviours are changing in order to be able to define a vision for what that future experience needs to look like. And that's going to rely on insight, customer data, being able to bring things like personas and workshops and people from across categories together to define that solution. And then, of course, the difficult bit, actually being able to implement that change. So final slide is just the summary. And these are just the top takeaways. So remembering that the basics of customer experience are the same as they've ever been. Remembering that everybody is on the Corona coaster, you, me, your family, your friends, your customers, your employees. So that really human mindset about being able to respond with that understanding will be something that will set you apart, be remembered and retain customers in the future. That things are not going to return to normal. So we need to be considering how we reopen the economy safely. We need to review the customer journey in line with any government guidelines. As I mentioned, all the things like queuing, put health and safety and wellbeing first in everything that we do, including for ourselves. Understand the local impact of the behaviour shifts. And when I say local, I don't mean kind of demographically local to your physical location, but in terms of the retail formats that you provide and the industry of retail you're in. Adapt to the changes as they come, driven by that kind of putting customers and employees at the heart and the centre of finding what needs to change, and then thinking about how you can build your capability in customer experience design to know what to change, when, how, and what that looks like. That's it. Yeah, if you want to get into contact with me, feel free. LinkedIn, Instagram, I'm pretty much on omnichannel. I've gone omnichannel already. But yeah, if I can be of any help, do let me know.
Yeah, no, great. I mean, I've written down quite a bunch of stuff there, Claire. I've got a few questions if I can just bring you back a little bit.
Sure. Wipe my whistle.
Yeah, go for it. One of the early things you talked about was obviously the whole emotion people are going around, and I really enjoyed the Corona coaster because the reality is everyone's going through so many different things at the moment. With your experience, you've done so much work in particularly the retail sector and the hospitality sector. If I said to you emotions, spending habits, and how those things are linked, what have you seen, and what are you predicting and telling people in terms of how people's emotions and how that's driving spending habits at the moment and maybe over the next few months? Well,
I guess if you're fearful of the future, you're not going to be spending much money at all because you're going to be worried whether you're going to have any, for example. Or if you're scared, if you're one of the more vulnerable people who, I don't know, say you've even just got asthma, that concern about being able to go out and shop will mean a change in behaviour to do absolutely everything online because you can't leave the house. But also, I think the kind of top of the coaster is maybe as important, if not more so, because the brands that are, really thinking about community, getting those positive messages out there that make us feel good are the ones that we're going to continue to have a positive impression of, even if we've not used them before. So as the economy reopens, if you're known for doing the right thing and putting people first and potentially even innovating to provide solutions based around their needs and remove negative emotions and really helping to pump out the positive ones, then that's going to have the kind of brand impact that will mean people either stay with you or come to you longer term. Does that make sense?
No, that's really good. I mean, and that's the thing, isn't it? Because was it 3 years ago, when England were doing really well in the World Cup? People forgot about Brexit, and we had a big spend on the high streets. But obviously, as soon as we got back to the Brexit conversation, everything got depressed, didn't it? So
and there's a lot of people out there that have been taken care of with the furlough schemes, but there are also a lot of people that haven't and have fallen through the gaps. So I think value, kind of like value in all of its senses, not just price, is going to be what becomes the most important key driver, because it will have a very emotional response to it.
And then the other thing you said was around the whole, maybe it's a surprise to some people, but locally we're seeing a lot of goodwill. I've certainly seen people, in the queue, let older people through, and things like that. That's been quite refreshing, hasn't it?
Oh, 100%. And I think for retail employees, especially, being counted amongst key workers and being clapped for will be a massive morale boost that was much needed. The people that work incredibly long hours, particularly now when they're effectively being put at more risk for having to be there, that the goodwill of the customers in the stores and the employees themselves is what's keeping things going.
Yeah, they're great. And what do you mean by category switching? That got my attention.
Sorry, that's a very retail term that probably if you're not in the grocery sector. So categories typically would be, let's think about a supermarket. You'd have fresh food, and that's where all the chicken and milk and everything will be. You'd have like non-food categories, which will be where the sports equipment that you might want to play with outside, now you're allowed to go out, might be. So what you'll be seeing is a set of categories that will decline because we can't do so much of it because of social distancing, probably things like related to social gatherings, I guess. And things will become more useful and need to be bought. So I gave that example of the fitness lines that are sold out absolutely everywhere on Amazon and in stores. When people have a higher demand for a different category, if you're not in that category or close to a category that people need, you're really going to struggle. So I think it's kind of categories, but also being in the right market. So you might have to change from what you're selling now to something either a bit different or radically different in order to keep up with what's going to be a very different landscape for a prolonged period.
Okay, I like that. And you've obviously not shied away in this period, because a lot of people were a little bit worried about, is it the wrong time to be on social media? You've stayed connected with your audience. Any feedback for anyone else? Because I think it's the right thing to do, 100%.
It depends what you're doing on social media. So I've stayed connected, but by trying to offer helpful value. So if I'm talking on social media, I'll be talking about things like the Corona coaster. I won't be saying, does anyone need my CX services? And I think it's difficult because I'm a consultant. I'm not in retail anymore to advise on what a retailer would do. But I think it's about relevance and presence and the communications that are joined up from a campaign that's designed to add value to customers right now. If you're in big formats, big corporate kind of retailers, and if you're acting more locally and on a smaller level, how you can just remind customers that you're there and you'll still be there, and present the positive or helpful impression that's needed right now. I know when we had your event, the Birmingham one online, we had a few questions, didn't we, from companies that are finding it really difficult because they are completely about social contact. And I need a physio at the moment, and my back's really bad. I can't go and see one.
You can't do that, can you?
my physio is providing, you know, online advice and talking on social media about the kinds of issues that we're having because we're sitting down a lot more or trying to work out from home. I think it's just, you know, trying to be relevant perhaps in a different way.
Yeah. So I mean, coming back to this slide, because there's a question there from Carl Baxter, who basically, you know, he's talking about the fact that, you know, at the moment people are putting up with the queuing, but patience is wearing obviously for people queuing up, and you know. He says the absolute key challenge is making customers feel like you can support their business as usual as well as your own. And I think we are going to go through that period, aren't we, where we're going to put something in place like the picture you've got here, maybe learn something and have to evolve quickly. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely fair. I didn't catch the question, sorry, from Carl.
Yeah, I think Carl's saying the absolute key challenge is making customers feel like you can support their business as usual, regardless of your own situation.
Oh, I see. Yeah, and I think it's difficult, isn't it? That how long is the goodwill and the patience of queuing going to last, as an example? But you know, realistically, we can't do anything other than the government's telling us to do, because realistically, if we don't, we could be in the beginning of the Corona coaster all over again and having to lock down. So I hope that there'll be more messaging from the government about helping us to keep the right mindset as consumers as well as businesses. And how can you use communication to most effectively manage customers too? So I know when, like at Christmas time, for example, in Sainsbury's, could be a bit of a bloodbath actually when people were arguing over turkeys on Fresh Week. So we introduced employees at kind of key times to help be hosts and helpers and help customers to find things. So I suppose it's also thinking like, what's the role of employees going to evolve into in helping it feel more business as usual.
Yeah, I like that.
And availability, I suppose, will be the other thing, wouldn't it? You need to be able to have the things that they need available to them. So that's the best. I suppose that's the most constant thing we can do and assure that it doesn't revolve around their behaviour, is being able to help them ensure that they do meet the need that they came to us for, which is back to CX 101, the first slide, the things that are still true and constant. Can they get what they want to? And that's not different than it was before.
Yeah, no, I like that. And as you say, you take it right back to the basic principles. Last question. You know, on here you're talking about payments. People, again, we talked about we don't really want to queue up. Is there room for, you know, certain retailers? I mean, I know practically it's not possible, but for retailers to have more payment terminals around their stores to reduce the amount of time people are queuing up for, maybe?
It depends on format, and I know years ago at Sainsbury's we were thinking about like different payment points and locations, and at the time the pushback was always security. So the solution we came up with was like Smart Shop. So how do you get customers to be able to scan and check out without actually touching the sides? So I don't know if you've seen that Smart Shop in things like Sainsbury's, but evolving that from it being picking up a gun at the front of the store, walking around and going through checkout, to using like mobile payments, mobile technology, similar to like in Apple, someone can check you out wherever you are. I guess it depends on the formats of your store and what you do and how the customer journey works. But I think now it's all up for review and all up for consideration. But, you know, making massive investments in the short term for something that's not going to service the long term wouldn't be a wise thing to do either. So I think that's why I was saying kind of get back to customer experience design and being able to understand the insights that are coming in and visualize what the future should look like for your customers and employees, and being able to reverse engineer to that. It's a longer term view. It's just been massively accelerated because of what's happened. Okay,
brilliant. Really good to speak to you here today, Claire.
Thank you.
So obviously I've got your contact details up. You know, you're extremely friendly. You're more than happy to have a chat with people.
Honestly, I'm so bored at the moment. Like, please come to me and I'll give you as much advice as you need. When's the book out? Well, it's interesting actually, because the book that I wrote was finished and I had a book tour all around the world planned, and because all the events got cancelled, I decided to delay the launch. And during that time, my mind uncoiled a little more, and I decided that wasn't the right book for that's needed now. So I'm working on a second book or second version of the book, which is much more kind of post the 20 years of customer experience that we've had so far. What is the future view on getting rid of some of the dogma and moving it forward? So I'll keep you posted, but that's what I'm working on right now.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, look, really good to speak to you, Claire. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you. And I don't know who was there, but thank you everyone for listening in and have a lovely weekend. Hopefully it's going to be sunny.
No problem. See you soon. Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.